So excited to welcome Tom Scott to our speaker series this morning. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll start, as we always do, with a moment of silence led by Tracy. So Tracy, you're on.
1, 2, 3. One, two, three.
Thank you, Tracy. I have the responsibility, Tom, to introduce a man who needs no introduction. They have read your amazing biography, how you've gone from Ivy League to selling beverages off a boat to becoming an internationally recognized entrepreneur, a producer, and now a visionary, somebody who through the Neighborhood Project and the Nantucket Project, and then this amazing film that you're creating, you're somebody who is trying to bring individuals out of their lonely lives of being between in screens and separated from each other, in living moments of prolonged, particularly in the pandemic, existential dread and loneliness and angst, trying to bring them into community, which you say is synonymous with joy. And certainly this community, we try and make it synonymous with joy. It's embedded in our mission. And it is a joy to have you this morning to share your life story and have a wonderful dialogue with our friends. I do want to say it's really fascinating. And the students know this, that you're really trying to bring people together by understanding and sharing their narratives. And it's what we need, particularly in this time of national and global fragmentation. And so it's a joy to introduce somebody who Shunryu Suzuki said, praised it, the beginner's mind. Something that Suzuki said in the beginner's mind, there is no thought, I have attained something, even though you have attained a lot of things, and kids will have questions asking you about what you've attained. But the beginner's mind is compassionate and boundless. And somebody who has the beginner's mind is somebody who has an attitude of openness, eagerness, and a lack of preconceptions. And so, Tom, you really, are emblematic of that. Somebody, who's grown businesses but still keeps this sense of wonder and possibility for himself and for the people that you touch through your work. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Tom. What a pleasure to see you again after all these years. We talked, I guess, maybe a couple of weeks ago, but it's great to have you in front of our full school community.
Thank you for that. That was very, very nice. So I'm Tom. You guys aren't going to all believe this, but some of you will. I'm really fortunate to be here. Like, I am very fortunate just to be, I had an opportunity to meet a couple of the kids leading into this. Can you guys hold on? Sorry, I just had to get quiet. I just got to give me. Sorry. So there's nothing like people. There is no greater gift than to have the opportunity to interact with each other and to go somewhere, right? And so I was saying this to somebody yesterday, like, I'm a wanderer in some ways, and that's not all good, right? My life has been a strange journey. I do feel fortunate that that's who I am, but it also has moments of challenge. I really, the reason that Ivan and I know each other is because of Nantucket Nectars. I had a business success that was broadly celebrated, which meant, you know, we were on Oprah and the Today Show and People Magazine and all these different things. This is back in the 90s. And there's good in that. You know, there's bad too. I'll get to that in a moment. But we started what was originally a floating store. I had a boat and I made a store and I sold things at the store, 2 boats in a harbor. And one of the things we sold was juice, and it became a big juice company, which was great. It was very innocent. You know, I failed accounting in college. And if you don't know what accounting is, that's kind of how you count the money and you figure out how much you're making or not making. As I say, I failed. I remember on the first exam, the professor said the grades range from 100 to a 42. And I was sitting next to the guy who would become my partner in business, a guy named Tom First. He got a 42. He got the lowest grade in the class. I got a 52. It was a disaster. But, you know, 15 years later, I'm sitting with the head of your school, being honored at your school in part for what had become a business success, right? And it was a public success. So I all of a sudden had sort of a place to speak from, a place to see from, a place to consider the world, which is hard to understand because I remember people used to say to me like, Tom, you have a platform. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. You know, I make juice. I don't know what you're talking about. But what it did is it brought me here. Like it ended up bringing me places and allowed me to see things in life that have been gifts. But I'm going to say this because it's an important part of the story. You know, you've probably heard the expression before, on paper, it was a success. And it was. My father is a former Marine. I was raised in a household. I loved my father dearly, but he was tough. He was very tough. And we had a lot of discipline in the house. We were raised in a happy house. And I worked hard for everything I had. But I was never as praised as I was as to when, other than when I did Nantucket Nectars. So for the first time in my life, I was being praised very often. I had a lot of money. Never thought I'd have a lot of money in life. I didn't expect that to happen either. And I would think that praise and money are 2 pretty good things. Like that would seem like the things I want in life, praise and money. And what I would tell you is that there's been no more corrupting influence in my life, no more challenge in my life than praise and money. What happens is people start treating you differently. People start allowing you to cut corners. People start complimenting you in ways they didn't before, laughing at your jokes the way they didn't before. Nothing worse than when people fake laugh at your jokes, right? Because when people are fake laughing at your jokes, you're not earning the moment. And when you earn the moment, you're in relationship. If people are saying things just to please you, you're no longer in relationship. And why am I saying this? I'm not trying to be negative anyway, and this will go somewhere I hope that you find useful. But the lesson that I learned at that time, it's what I said to the guys earlier on the call. I always say Serena Williams. I really respect Serena Williams. You guys know, many of you know Serena Williams, probably the greatest women's tennis player of all time. And I think Serena Williams has one of the great gifts of life, which is to lay it all on the field. She gets to work hard over and over and over again. And it's the greatest feeling in the world, which is to say you leave everything you have on the field. You give everything of yourself. And the feeling you have afterwards is the greatest feeling in the world. Here's the thing about Serena. She has to go back and do it again the next time. Just because she was the greatest thing of all time and is in Nike ads doesn't mean she doesn't have to show up again the next time. And guess what? The person she's playing, they're not going to fake laugh at her jokes. They're not going to give it to her because she's got more money than them or more fame than them. She's going to have to start over all again. And in my life, having built what was then a big business, I mean, this may sound crazy to you, but in those days, there was like 10 young entrepreneurs in America. You know, today there's many of those, Mark Zuckerberg and lots of people that you hear about. But in those days, there was like 10 of us. And so we got all the praise. We got all the publicity. And it was sort of nothing I had ever expected my life to become. Well, what I missed when after that happened is it turns out I actually like to do the act every day, the act of making a better juice, the act of making a better label, the act of making a product that's good for you. And so what I discovered in that process, by the way, I had a fall. I had a moment in my life which was really difficult, where I really lost my way. I won't go into the detail just because it's really not worthy of spending too much time on, because we all have them, right? And so the great lesson that I learned in that time, and you know, Ivan mentioned earlier, the dark night of the soul, right? And it's a phrase that over time you come to hear, which is when you're in a place in your life, which sounds bad, and it is kind of bad because you're in a really dark place. Here's the good news about dark place. It's easy to see the light in a dark place. And when you start to see the light more clearly when you're in a dark place, it gives you a really good sense of where the path is. And for me, I loved to work on something that was worthy and had meaning. And, you know, there's this expression, which, you know, if you're religious, you could say that God will provide. If you're less so, you might say, consider the lilies of the field, which is just sort of this notion that live in the work, don't live in the results. And when you live in the work, the places it takes you are the greatest gifts in the world. Some of those gifts are financial sometimes. And I'm going to say that because that is true too. But what I wanted to add to it is that the real gifts that I've had in my life since that time are gifts of connection, gifts of love, gifts of joy, and gifts of peace. Okay. Now, if I were your age and I heard someone say that, I would think to myself, you know, give me the gifts of the money and the pats on the back. Like that sounds better to me. And I respect that because that's how I felt when I was your age. But here's what I can say with a great deal of confidence. You can either think about and learn that lesson today, or you can learn that lesson later. And this is probably the most arrogant thing I'll say today, but I'm going to be right. I'm right that your real joy in life is going to come from things of meaning, things that matter. Okay. And I'm just going to use one quick example of, so there's a guy named Casey Neistat who I don't know if you guys know or not, but he's one of the biggest YouTubers in the world. And, you know, one of the things I started to do when I left the juice business was I started to make films and TV out of meaning. I was like, I want to do meaning because I want to tell stories, because meaning in life is real, but unfortunately our culture doesn't talk about it a lot. Well, I met Casey Neistat. I hired him to do some work for me. And I loved him. And I loved him mostly for his attitude. And I said, Casey, I want to make a movie with you because I just think you're so talented. What do you think? How might we make a movie together? And he said, let me think about it. And he came back to me like a week later and he said, can we make a TV show? And I said, well, about what? He said, I want to make a TV show about my life. And so we talked about it. He has a really interesting life. He dropped out of school when he was 16 years old and had a child. And he went through an interesting set of circumstances. And so Casey and I that day committed to each other to make it. And I said, just you, me, and we had two other guys, 4 of us made this television show. And in the last episode of the show, we went to HBO to show them the show with 7 of the episodes done, which is not how you normally make a show. It's not how you normally do it. Normally you go and you pitch it and you get an idea and they give you money and you go make it. But in this case, we walked in with the whole shebang. And we had a camera. And so part of the story was trying to sell the story to HBO. And the good news is HBO said yes. They bought the show within hours of us sharing the show with them. And that became a show called The Neistat Brothers, which was a show on HBO, like, I don't know, 2009 or something, a number of years ago. Over the next couple of years, I had a film in the Cannes Film Festival and the Sundance Film Festival, had the show on HBO. We won the Independent Spirit Award, which is the award for again, I won't go into detail, but we were making lots of films. But we made a film that won the Independent Spirit Award, which is sort of like winning the Oscar for an independent film. And this was all happening in the midst of what I described, which is the dark night of the soul, the falling from a place where people had kind of exalted me. And I want to say this, and you're just going to have to trust me when I say this. The goal was not to win the awards. The goal was not to be on HBO. The goal was to tell stories that we loved making. Loved it. Loved it. Like loved it all day, all night, thinking about it all day, all night. And the sense that when you share a story, because here's the thing that's critical to remember about a story. It's true in juice too, but so everyone says that business people, you know, sometimes they say they're geniuses or whatever they say. The real geniuses are the people who are either going to choose it or not, because they know in an instant whether they want it or not. And one of the ways you know that people want to like your story is because lots of people want to watch it and they share it with their friends, and then more people watch it. And that's how you know that a story is doing well. Now, there's stories that are gross, and we don't need to get into that right now. But the feeling of being part of telling a story that had meaning and getting a sense that other people care about meaning too has been the greatest reward in my life. Outside of friends and family, by the way, because family's a big deal. And I learned all of that the hard way. But what I can tell you is that, do they call you Ivan? I keep saying Ivan. Is that okay?
They probably call me worse than that off camera, but yes.
Nowadays, I do something called the Neighborhood Project. And the Neighborhood Project is, think of it as we share short stories together and then we talk about them. That's it. That's all it is. But they're all their own films. They're all about meaning, and it's growing all over the country. And one of the ways that Ivan and I connected is I had done a story this summer. I was like the rest of you, I was cooped up inside and I started kind of losing it. So in May, I'm going to guess like May 5th, I grabbed one guy, said, hey, I got to get out of here. I want to see what's happening in the world, because again, I'm sort of skeptical of what we see in the media. How do people really feel? And how much are they struggling? And, you know, and I've just spent a lot of time traveling. I've gone across the country by train 8 times. I've driven probably 15 times. I've done it on a motorcycle. I do it over and over. And what you find when you're in real life, I think 90-something% of us are good. 90-something% of us want to work together. We care about each other. But media likes to tell the story about the other small percentage of the people who aren't like that. But the good news is, and I can attest, is that most of the people are good. And if you get out there and you spend time, you realize that. And that's why I went. When I came home, I had this very strong sense, and I said it to my friends. I said, there's going to be a revolution in this country. People are, you know, we're in a weird time. And then George Floyd happened. I think it was the 25th, and I got home the 23rd or something. It was something like that. And so it was painful, like it was for probably many or all of you. And we decided that we were going to do it again. Instead of 2 people, 15 of us went down. We drove from New York to the northern tip of the Mississippi River, all the way down the river and back home. And we would gather outdoors with masks on, mixed race people. And we talked about race in America. And it was really intense, tears and, you know, upset moments and hug moments and all the mix, we saw it all. And it was, for me, you know, I kept my mouth shut. You're hearing me talk a lot, but on this trip, I just kept my mouth shut and I witnessed and I watched, and I will be forever changed by that. And again, when I think about the gift of having the opportunity to watch people share their souls, it's pretty profound. I'm going to mention one name. There's a woman in Memphis, Tennessee. Her name was Gabby. And Gabby was a young Black woman who didn't graduate from high school. And she, you know, you could tell she was kind of anxious. And about an hour and a half into the conversation, she said, I want to say something. And we said, okay. And she said, I don't speak as well as the rest of you, but... And what poured out of her mouth, which I won't try to imitate because I can't, like the heart and the beauty of what she said was just too profound for me to share with you right now. But I will just do my best to say that it was one of the most life-changing experiences I've ever had. And I think what I witnessed was someone who was bearing exactly who they were, exactly how they felt. And that what I was witnessing was one of the most special moments of my life. Now, you may sound that may sound dramatic, and I accept that may sound dramatic. But for somebody who does a lot of movies, a lot of times with lots of people, to be in that place at that moment was a gift, which is why, if I go back to what I said at the very beginning, just to be here with you guys today is as good as I can do in life, in the sense that I actually get to experience some of the gifts of what it is to be a human being. And so that's really what my job is today, is to go and try to put my heart and the hearts of the people that I work with into stories and share those stories with other people such that we can all effectively harmonize. Like, I think of it like that. Like, I just want to harmonize with each other, and you can't harmonize with one note. You can't really harmonize with two. You need a lot. And the best harmonies that you experience are the ones that you don't expect. You know, you don't know what's coming next. And when you get to do those things, it's really special. And that's what I get to do. Now, if I were you, I'd probably think like, what is that guy talking about at the end? And I respect that. So I'm going to shut up and allow you to ask me if you like about that or any other thing I've said. And I hope this has been useful. And Ivan, I hope I'm doing this right, but that's what I got so far.
It's perfect. Thank you so, so much, Tom. And we have lots of questions for you. We're excited to open it up to our students. And the first question comes from Catherine.
Hi, good morning. I would like to thank you for being our virtual speaker today. And I've learned that you are the creator of the Neighborhood Project. I love the idea of people coming together as a way of addressing issues of isolation and anxiety among community members. How has the current pandemic impacted issues such as anxiety and isolation
Yeah.
within communities? How do you think we must adapt to addressing these issues during this time when people can't come together and must remain socially distanced?
Yeah. It's not, I don't want to say this with, too casually, but the good news about crisis is that they also come packed with learning. And doesn't mean I would ever wish a crisis on anybody, but it is, I think, the case that in life, said this earlier as well, that pain is coming, but suffering is optional, right? And we're all going to experience difficult things, and COVID has been a difficult thing. At the same time, I think part of what COVID has done, at least in part, is it's brought clarity to certain parts of our lives. And because that clarity has come to be more, that's silly, but because of that clarity, I think we have a better sense and a better nose for where the truth lies. And so when people get together, ironically, like we're doing now, we're actually in a virtual scenario right now. I want to make I call this digital realism. Like this is some version of close to real through a digital experience. I am making the argument, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but I would argue that Snapchat, and I would argue that Facebook, and I would argue that Twitter is worse on the scale of digital realism than what we're doing right now. But because of our isolation, we recognize our need to come together, and it has helped our project. We didn't start this in reaction to COVID, but in interesting ways, COVID has accelerated the work that we're doing. So it's been a poorly wrapped gift. How's that?
Thank you so much for that, Tom. And our next question is going to come from Sophia.
Hi, good morning. What inspired you to create your own juice brand, and how has the beverage industry evolved over the years since the creation of Nantucket Nectars?
So, I feel like the boring way of putting it is, I think among the greatest things you could discover in your life is your bliss, is the word that some people use, but let's just say it's a passion, something that you really care about. There's something to wanting things, right? Like you might think like, I would love a really good mango, or I would love better tasting popcorn, or I would love, a bike that has 3 seats instead of 1. I'm making that up, right? Really what Nantucket Nectars was, because I mentioned that we'd started a floating store, and that was the summer of 1987. Summer of 1987 also happened to be a really hot summer. And in those days, which only a couple of you on this call will remember, but long story short is drinks were lame. Like you couldn't even buy fresh orange juice. It just didn't exist. Long story short is that juice in particular was quite bad. So we started making fresh juice. And we made it for a very critical reason that I think it's important to think about, which is that we wanted it. Simple as that. Like, why did you start making juice? Because I wanted it. I want that juice. and I'm normal. I'm average. I'm an average person. Like, I love lemonade. Guess what? Lots of people do. But the problem is in those days, lemonade, by the way, is a really easy ingredient: water, lemon, sugar. And if you can imagine, in those days, you could not buy water, lemons, and sugar. You couldn't buy it. It was high fructose corn syrup, FD&C yellow number 5 dye. There was never pulp in it. It was always made from concentrate. And so those were some of the things that we did, but we did it because we wanted it. And that has been something I've carried with me forever, is that all my jobs, I want the thing I make for me, which is just different than, I don't sit around and think like, what can I make to make money? I sit around and think, what do I want that doesn't exist? And I think that's a good way to think about starting anything. It doesn't have to be a business. It could be, you could write music. You could, paint a painting or make a sculpture or do anything because you want it. That's a good sign.
Thank you so much. And our next question will come from Lanine.
Good morning. I learned from your bio that you reinvented yourself as a film and TV producer. What was your first production, and how did it make you feel to have a public audience view your work for the first time?
Yeah. The first film I made was a disaster. And in retrospect, what I learned is that the reason they wanted me involved in the film is because I could pay for it. Now, sometimes you learn everything the hard way. Well, that was how I learned that the hard way. But here's the thing I will tell you is that I think about my father a lot. My father's a really special person, and my father, he believes in heroes, and that may seem obvious, but you go through life and you realize there's not that many people who really believe in heroes, because our world gets cynical, and for good reason. I'm not, but I'm glad I'm not as cynical, in part because of my father. My father believes in heroes, and therefore I've always believed in great stories. I've just always believed that there are great truths to uncover and share, particularly in a day and age where, you guys probably know this, but if you just want to look at the most successful videos on YouTube or TikTok or one of those things, there ain't that much meaning in them. I hate to tell you, you probably already know this, but they're really shallow. They tend to be about negative things. And I mean, I know this to be a fact. I don't know if you guys know Van Jones. Van Jones is a really interesting guy. He's a media guy. He's a great guy, Van Jones. And Van Jones worked on a program to get mostly Black men out of prison over the last several years. And he succeeded really wildly. It's worked really well. And I think Van Jones is therefore heroic. Okay. Van Jones also collaborated with a guy named Newt Gingrich. And Newt Gingrich, if you don't know, is sort of like the opposite of, politically speaking, of Van Jones. But Van Jones and Newt Gingrich worked together towards good ends. If you look at Van Jones's public profile over the last 2 years, the number one thing about Van Jones is that he collaborated with a bad man, and it's all over the place. What you barely see is that he got thousands and thousands of men out of prison through his good works. That should tell you something, okay? Because Van Jones' good story is beautiful. Van Jones' bad story is kind of meaningless. And yet that's the one that got all the buzz. What I would submit is that the only reason that's true is because we didn't put the love and the energy into telling the good story about Van Jones such that we all can see it and feel it and understand it. And if you understand what I just said, if you have a sense of what I just said, isn't that a great mission to be a part of? To be part of a mission where you're actually doing something for the good, which, by the way, like the Serena Williams example, is hard. It's hard. It's so much easier to make someone look stupid and meme it around than it is to make someone look special when they do the good thing. And so that's the fight that I've kind of been in for a while. And that's how I view it. And the work is really hard. I'm going to give you just one. So there's one story I made, and it's about a blind man. It's a beautiful story. And it was the first time I directed a movie. So I won't go into details, but directing is sort of a new level of commitment. And so I was the director on this film. And there's a guy named Robert Redford. Robert Redford is, if you don't know him, if you're Ivan and my age, you know Robert Redford. He's a big movie star from the old days. Still alive, but it is the old days. And so I convinced Robert Redford to be the voiceover, the narrator of this film, which was a big deal. And then I went to Robert Redford and I recorded Robert Redford doing the voiceover on the film. Well, the film is about a boy who, his blindness, he's blind till he's 10 years old, and it's cured. He can all of a sudden see at 10 in one day because a blind man created a solution to his form of blindness. It's a good story. You got a blind man curing blindness for a boy. Well, when we recorded Robert Redford, I hadn't met the boy yet because the boy lived in Brussels. So we had to fly to Brussels to meet the boy. And all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I meet a 17-year-old kid who was blind until he was 10, and now he can see. Like, it's hard to even imagine. Well, that guy had wisdom, like lots and lots of wisdom, particularly for a 17-year-old. And he spoke in a really interesting way. And we interviewed him. And when I heard it and when I observed it, I thought, this kid has got to be the voiceover in the film. Okay, now creatively, that's not such a stretch. If you'd been there, I think you would have agreed. The bad news is someone's got to call Robert Redford. Someone's got to say, Robert, you're out. We're firing you, right? Well, that's scary as hell. And you can just imagine sitting in a meeting with my coworkers and they're saying, you can't fire Robert Redford. And I'm saying, damn it, I got to fire Robert Redford. And here we go, right? And okay, so why do I tell you that story? Someone should do that with Van Jones and getting people out of prison. Make those decisions, do the hard work, elevate the good work that he's doing such that we will be the benefactors of it because we'll start sharing good stories more broadly. That was more than you asked for, but I will tell you that the feeling, and so that film, it's called The Illumination. I showed it live at this event. There's about 500 people there. And I didn't know. I just didn't know. You never know. You don't know until you actually say, hey, have a try. And I showed the film and the film ended and people were crying and clapping. And I was just like, oh my God, it was a great feeling. But the feeling was after a long road of hard decisions and hard work. And I think that's just the way everything's going to go in life. And that's okay.
Thank you so much for that, Tom. And our next question comes from Jocelyn, and she is curious to ask about the Nantucket Project.
Hi, good morning. I've learned that you started the Nantucket Project in 2011 in order to create a space where some of the best thinkers can gather and tell stories. Can you tell us a little more about what inspired this project and what do you think are some benefits of storytelling?
Yeah, I've done a lot of that. So I'll and I know I can be long-winded and I apologize for that. But remember I mentioned Gabby, who's the woman I met in Memphis on the trip down the Mississippi River. Now, Gabby, I also mentioned, didn't graduate from high school. And I mentioned that Gabby shared, among the most beautiful pieces of information that have ever been shared with me. That's a pretty good analogy for what I've learned over the last 10 years, right? Because I think when you start something like this, this is a word that has different kinds of meaning, but elite is a word that it's used a lot today. It wasn't used as much in the past, but the notion of elite is think of it as like those most exalted members of our culture. And who are they? They are like, they go to Yale or Harvard and they work at banks or whatever, right? That's sort of how you think about the elites. And what I didn't know when I was young, when I moved to Nantucket, is that Nantucket was a place that drew elite people. Now, in retrospect, it's obvious, but when you're a kid, you don't really know those things. Like I didn't know those things. I just thought it was a pretty cool place with fishing boats. I just didn't know. Well, it is a place that in the traditional sense has a lot of elite types. Well, elite types like to look at elite types, unfortunately. However, what if you could serve up real beauty to elite types? Then what impact might you have? And that really became the mission. If I have a hope more than any other. Well, here's the good news. I started from a place of great frustration because you guys aren't old enough to know this, but when Ivan and I were young, there was 3 TV channels. And by the time we were 20, there was like 100. And the 98 new ones or the 97 new ones were junk. Mostly it was junk. And it's frustrated me. And news in particular, which used to be, you know, there were these guys in the past named Walter Cronkite and pick your person. They sort of represented, I don't know what the right word is, authority and truth or something like that. And then it turned into like a spitting match. Like, you know, it's like, have at it and everyone fight. And so I wanted to make something that wasn't that. I wanted to create something that again told these truths. And at the time, the notion of doing it live meant a lot to me, because it's hard to lie to someone to their face. If you're standing right in front of somebody, it's just the odds of being more authentic go way up. And that's really the power, I think, of live. So over the last 10 years, I've been fortunate enough to discover the Gabbies and tell their stories as often as possible. That doesn't mean, by the way, like I'm sure you guys may know Brian Stevenson, or, you know, he won our audience award. There are people who win our audience award who are pros, like real pros. And, you know, depending on your definition, Brian Stevenson is an elite, like of a certain kind, for sure. Is he an elite? So I'm not trying to say elite is a bad word. I am trying to say it's a tired word. And I think knowledge, you know, because Yale exists, it's okay. I'm not against Yale. I'm not against Harvard. But sometimes when you put Yale next to real knowledge, you miss out on the fact that there's way more, A, just volume of knowledge, but B, I would argue higher knowledge that lives outside of those places. And that's what I hope we can do well.
Thank you so much for that. And our next question comes from Anthony.
Hi, good morning. My name is Anthony. I'm in the 8th grade, and my question for you is, I am impressed with your success and all your accomplishments throughout your career journey. What has been your favorite position that you've held over these years, and why?
That's a great question. So you're going to think I'm kind of lying, but it's being a dad. I mean, that's number one. And I know that's kind of boring maybe to some of you, but that is true. That is true. It's the position I have now, though, professionally speaking. I was very motivated. Once I knew what business was, I became very motivated to win in business, and winning meant size, largely, you know, big dollars, big presence kind of thing. It turns out I can promise you, I know this is going to be hard to understand, but like the guy who owns, pick your team, the San Diego Chargers, I guess they're the LA Chargers now, but whatever, a very wealthy person who owns a professional sports team. Let's say Jerry Jones, the guy who owns the Dallas Cowboys. Well, I can promise you Jerry Jones can't get enough too. Jerry Jones is jealous of Bob Kraft. Jerry Jones wants more Super Bowls. He will never satisfy, ever. And this is hard to believe. I'm just telling you, I've been around. Ivan's been around. We've been around. You will never satisfy your desire for more. Ain't going to happen. And so I was fortunate enough to see that as a relatively younger person, in part through crisis. And now my job, most of the time, because I'm a human being and I get greedy and insecure too, but most of the time I think about bringing Gabby's story to light. And I think about laying it on the field, which means when I'm suffering through something, you know, as I said, suffering is optional, but I suffer too because I lose sight of things. I'm able to not think in terms of I have to, but in terms of I get to, right? So I get to do these things. And that's why what I'm doing right now is the best job I've ever had, because I think that way more. And trust me, like if you're in my business, just so for what it's worth, revenue is the amount of dollars you bring in the door on an annual basis. And we lost 90% of our revenue this year. And I do live events and like I count on brands to sponsor. We got almost $0 this year, which means we've almost gone out of business like every other week for the last year. It's been really hard. And yet I can wake up each morning and have the energy to keep going because I'm lucky that I do something I love. I can tell you this, if I was making shovels right now or trying to sell wing nuts, I bet I would have quit by now.
Thank you so much for that. And our next question comes from Crystal, and she wants to ask about your work as a producer.
I am really interested in learning how to produce films. My question for you is, what is the main responsibilities of a producer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And by the way, if you're in this industry, most people don't even know the answer to that question. Think of it like this, okay? I think the two most critical jobs in making a film are the producer and the director. The producer's job, okay, so right now I'm going to make this up. I can see a couple of your names. I'm going to make a movie with April and Rebecca and Melissa, okay? And okay, so I'm now producing. I want it to be about building a popcorn company. I want it to be 5 episodes long. I want it to be on Netflix. I want it to have a happy ending. And I want it to feel, I don't know the right word. I want it to have the Spike Lee feel. Okay? Whatever that is, if you guys know Spike Lee. But, you know, like musicians, there's different styles. And what I just did is act as a producer. So what do I have to do? I got to call Spike. First of all, I got to call April and Rebecca and Melissa and say, hey guys, can we do this? And Melissa, you're going to play the founder, and Rebecca, you're going to run the factory, and April, you're going to do, right? So I talk to you guys, and then I call Spike and I'm like, hey, I got this idea. It's going to be a movie. It's about a popcorn company, and we're going to set it in Dubuque, Iowa, and Spike's like, okay, but here's how much you have to pay me. And I get final cut, which I won't bore you with all that. And so what did I do? I went from 0, and then the movie's done, to the movie's done. Got paid for. We got the cameras there. We got the director there. We put music in it. We signed contracts with the actors, like all this stuff. There's this notion of manifest. You make manifest a film. That's what a producer does. Producer makes the film go from 0 to 100. The director, like I'm guessing, if I called Spike Lee and said, April, Rebecca, and Melissa and I are going to make a movie, Spike's going to say, Tom, here's how much you're going to pay me. And I get final cut, which means Spike's, like I can't call him and say, you know, I love the movie, but I really think that you should use blue shirts instead of red shirts. He's going to say, buzz off. I'm the director. I get to make the final call. The director's job is to turn in the creative aspects of the film, the way it looks and feels and sounds and all those other things. And as you can guess, there's always this interesting relationship between a producer and a director. And one of the most critical jobs of a producer is to find a good director who you can work with and make them as happy as they need to be and make a movie that as many people as possible can see. And that's what a producer does.
Thank you so much for that explanation. And we do have, we want to be mindful of your time, actually. Do you have time for 2 more questions?
I do. I don't even know what my time is. Just look, I am fine is the bottom line.
Okay, perfect. Well, we do have one more question about, you know, your work in film and television, and that comes from Andre.
Thank you for being able to speak. My question for you is, what does it like on a film set? What is your favorite part of the day?
We're not getting any of that. I sound like his auto-tune. He was trying to, his auto-tune went wild. Poor
So
Andre.
I can translate for Andre. I think we're still hearing him, but I'm sorry about that. All right. So Andre's question, you saw him there, was what does a typical day look like on a film set? And what's your favorite part of making a movie? Of your favorite part of your day when you're making a movie?
Yeah. You know, they all look different. They all look different. The part I like the most, there's a word that's kind of overused now, but it is accurate, and it's nuance, right? And if you don't know what that word means, none of us actually know exactly what nuance means, and that's why I think it's actually a good word. But the notion of nuance is like as close to a representation of the individual truth of a matter as you can kind of get to, right? So, you know, you can watch a lot of films and you might walk away and say, was that a good person or a bad person? I would argue we're all a mix of all of those things, and that real characters are interesting mix of factors that sort of make up all of us. Like I am, you know, I'm proud of some of the things I've done, and I'm less proud of some of the things I've done. Like that's the truth about me. And I think I'm pretty accurate to say that's true of every one of you guys too, right? So that's truth. So when you watch a movie where, you know, there's the good guys and the bad guys, and they're like, one of them is totally evil and the other ones are totally good, like that's not that interesting to me, because I don't think that's actually the way life works. And there are some bad people for sure, and I'm not pretending there's not. But, you know, typically speaking, if you look at the great stories in history, like Star Wars, you know, Luke, his father turns out to be not the greatest guy in the world. And yet, at the end of the film, his dad's like, wants redemption and loves Luke. And if you've seen the movie, you know that his father was Darth Vader. And at the end, he kind of realized, like, I have. So is Darth Vader bad? Yeah, most of the time. But at the end, you know, you kind of loved Luke's father. And that's a good story. Like, that's what nuance is. And understanding nuance is, every one of them is an individual story. Like, there's no way that the nuance of Ivan and the nuance of me are the same. Like, no way. Right. And by the way, the nuance of you and the nuance of every person you will meet for the rest of your life will not be exactly like you. And a great story brings out as close to a representation of the nuance of truths, not only of characters, but of story. And the debate and the battle and the work that you have to go through to find those places is really hard work and really fun work, really fun to work through the layers of detail that makes a real story a great story. And I hope, as you watch movies, I hope you can do this. You know, I bet you do this in English class or whatever. You get to the end and say, well, they were good or they bad. Well, he did some bad things, but his father wasn't the best, or his mother wasn't the best, or he was, you know, he had to, or his brother would have starved. It's like, yeah, okay, now we're in a good place. Good place just from the point of view is it's a representation of real life. And I think when it comes right down to it, we all have a big hunger for the truth of the matter. You know, like we actually want it all the time. And when we feel it and taste it and smell it, we feel good. We feel like we're going places, even if it's bad sometimes. You know, even if it's bad, we'd rather know the bad than hide from it.
Thank you so much. And we wish we could spend all morning with you, but we want to be mindful of your time. We have one last question that comes from Sochikit Sali about, once again, your work with the Neighborhood Project.
Hi, good morning. I would like to thank you for being our speaker today. I really enjoyed your talk. And my question for you is, I was really inspired by your mission of the Neighborhood Project. What would you say has been the greatest accomplishment of this project so far?
It's a great question. By the way, you have a beautiful name. Can you say it one more time? Your name? Your first name?
Sochikit Sali.
It's a great name.
Thank you.
I'm going to answer you accurately, which is going to be a tiny bit grown up, but that's okay. You know, so mostly it's grown-ups, not always, but mostly it's grown-ups who join neighborhood projects. You know, typically parents are in neighborhood projects. And, you'll see, once you get into your 40s and your 50s, you're going to realize you're in this place in your life where you're caring not only for your children and for your families, but for your parents. You're in the, when you're a kid, it's your parents take care of you. And then for a while, you're just taking care of yourself. And then you may or may not get married, but if you get married or whatever, you build a family, well, then you take care of your family. And then before you know it, you're taking care of not only your family, but your parents as well. And so, which is a long-winded way of saying you are really busy, like all day, every day. You're thinking not only about your problems, but your coworkers' problems and your kids' problems and your parents' problems and bill problems and problems and problems and problems. And so you want to talk to people. So like when George Floyd happens, we're so overwhelmed and the news isn't going to tell us everything we want to know. So we want to talk to people. Now that's a macro, like political issue, but what about things like, my father was mean to me as a child and can I forgive him? Or I got divorced. I'm no longer married and I'm worried about my children. Or my child is on their computer all day and is abusing themselves in some way that's not healthy or whatever it might be. Well, that's big stuff. That's big stuff. And one of the things I've learned is that there is no better path to healing than connecting with other people and talking to them about it, who've been down that road, who can give you so many things like knowledge, but also love. And sometimes love comes in the form of, you got to stop that behavior. Like someone has to ask you to stop. And you're a little angry when they say it, or you're a little hurt when they say it, but you need someone to tell you those things. And that's what the Neighborhood Project does, is it provides an opportunity for you to better understand and navigate the world as a community. And it can come in the form of how to handle George Floyd, or it can come in the form of my child's depressed because we just got a divorce. And both of those things are really valuable. So that's what it's hoped to accomplish.
Thank you so much, Tom, for everything that you've shared with us this morning. And we'll wrap things up. We'll go back to Tracy, who will lead a moment of silence so we can take in everything that you've shared. And then Ivan will offer some last remarks.
1, 2, 3. One, two, three.
Thanks, Tracy. Tom, it's interesting that you heard the music of the Nahuatl language in Xochitl Salit's name. It means precious feather flower. And Xochitl Salit is a wonderful presence in our school and a phenomenal poet, and speaks wonderful witness to the origin of her families. And so, I mean, it tells a lot that particular name captivated you. I mean, you've got an ear for narrative and story that is really really powerful. And as we're speaking, and what my dear friend and colleague Courtney is just texting us, that we'll send you Xochitl Salit's poem. It's on YouTube, and it's about her name. So a great testament to your ear as a storyteller to know that there's a beautiful story behind her and her name. Well, what a joy to see you in front of our community. Obviously, I hope to you that you deeply resonated your life path and in your life work. I hope you see it resonated in the wonderful questions and energy that happened in this rectangular forum that's as close as we can get right now. Thank you so much. It's really, you talked about following your bliss, and that Joseph Campbell admonition and reminder, and what a wonderful example for our students and for all of us to know that we should do that, and also to know that there's great struggle in that process, but it's all worth it. So, I hope this is just the first of many touches you have with our school. I was bragging to my colleagues about the half hour of film I saw, and maybe we can get you back to do a screening of American Neighbor or some segments of that. But I want to thank you so much, and what a joy and a privilege it is to have you as part of our school community. We're a neighborhood with projects, and you're running the neighborhood project. So I think there's some poetic justice there as well. Tom, do you have any final words for us for this morning? Thank you again so much.
No, other than thank you, no, and that I would really like to. My parents got vaccinated. My birthday was on Tuesday, and they got vaccinated on Tuesday, so I'm really happy. And I say that because I'd love to come see the real deal sometime soon.
And we'll get you Soshi Quetzal's video.
Please, yeah.
All right, thanks so much, Tom. Take good care.
Thanks, you all. Great to spend time with you. I appreciate the time.